Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 106. Joynicole Martinez is joyful and passionate about leadership. Here's a shout out to listeners in Greece, specifically West Macedonia, Lower Saxony, Germany, Nova Scotia, Canada, and Oshkosh, Wisconsin. With that, let's get started. Recall what it was like back in the summer of 2020, and imagine an executive board getting together, trying to figure out what to communicate to employees and customers about all the civil injustice going on, in particular with the George Floyd murder. Enter Joynicole Martinez. Joynicole is someone who helps executive boards, whether it's strategic planning, policy development, or leadership training. She's consulted and has spoken to organizations across the world: United States, United Kingdom, Belgium, Netherlands, France, Russia, just to name a few. But that doesn't tell the story of Joynicole. You might be surprised to know she's an award-winning epidemiologist, and she's a subject matter expert at the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council, the Business Journal Leadership Trust, and she's a SheSource expert in the areas of business and economy, health, social justice. On top of that, she's a staff writer for the newspaper The Carolinian and is an inaugural member of the Peace 50 P50 community. She's a mom of 5 children and a really good person to get to know. Part 1, Afraid and Courageous. As early as the episode with Kim Campbell, the concept of courage has come up quite a bit. The way these guests define courage or being courageous is much different than what intuitively you might think. In this story, Joynicole talks about courage in a similar way as the other guests. Here's Joynicole.
When I was quite young, so I grew up in New York State, and when I was really young, I think it must have been 6th or 7th grade, we had a visit from wonderful people in North Carolina. Ironically, I live in North Carolina now, but had no idea I would ever land here. And I remember Eva Clayton, who was the first Black woman to represent North Carolina in Congress. She was standing in front of me. I was young, and I actually had her photo on a poster, a collage of powerful women on my wall. And I was shocked and amazed that she was standing in front of me. Like, how did this happen? We were in the library, Julian Bond Library. And I remember asking her, was she afraid? Just, aren't you afraid doing what you do? Running for office and being a politician. Perhaps my youth or immaturity, who knows? Just thinking, everything I've heard makes it so scary that you live in the South and you're a Black woman and you're doing this and you're out there and people know your name. Aren't you scared? And she leaned very closely to me, and she actually almost knelt, and she laughed a little bit when she said yes.
Oh.
And I will never forget that she actually like she was surprised that I would think she wasn't afraid. And so I asked them, why do you do it? And she said, someone has to. And that moment, physically, mentally, emotionally, changed my life. And it changed the trajectory of my choices. Because she admitted, she acknowledged, right? She said, yeah, I'm sure I'm scared. But she said it with such ease, as though she wasn't impeded by the fear and she wasn't ashamed of it. It didn't make her feel bad. She just owned it. But she knew she had to do what she had to do. It totally changed me.
When someone says something like that and laughs and openly says, yes, I am afraid, it seems to me that in that moment, they're not expressing fear, but they're expressing courage and honesty and vulnerability.
Yes. That's what really changed me. I grew up in the world where fear was considered the absence of faith, perhaps, or the absence of confidence, or the absence of courage.
Yeah.
And her physical position And her voice and the strength in her person said none of that. It didn't speak the absence of anything. It really said, I'm the most courageous person you've ever known. Because in the midst of me feeling afraid, I'm still moving. The call, the mission, the purpose was so much more significant than her fear.
It's interesting that when people think of fear, for some, it stems when they start to feel uncomfortable. In other words, what they're about to do, what they potentially would do or could do, is something that they don't feel comfortable doing. There's some risks involved. So they become afraid. But interestingly, and what I'm hearing also, how this may have affected her and you, is that in those moments, it's like saying, this is okay because I'm going to learn, I'm going to grow. Even though I may feel afraid or have some fear or feel uncomfortable, I'm still going to move forward because it's the right thing to do.
Yes. If there's a soundtrack to my life, that's it.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm scared. I'm uncomfortable. I'm unsure. I'm unsteady. But I know this is good. I know this is right. I know this is righteous. I'm going to keep going. And I truly believe that moment opened up my understanding of what fear was. It isn't so much that you have to be paralyzed by it or that you have to not feel it. We consider courage something that happens when you aren't afraid, but courage is not about not being afraid. It's just being able to use that energy to turn it around, to be able to use it to propel you like fuel. It's like saying, it's here, I feel it, and I'm not going to let it control my behavior or my actions. And there's something very powerful about being able to use energy that way, whether it's as simple as just standing on a stage and having your nervous uncomfortability, right? Your nerves or your fear of public speaking propel you into being charismatic, or having that same kind of reaction propel you into standing up for what's right and social justice, or just running away. There's something about it that says there's an absence. And the truth of fear or being uncomfortable is that there's a presence. Courage is more about accepting that presence and acting in spite of it.
Part 2, Rowing a Boat Together. There are several ways in which we can lead. One way is by modeling particular behaviors. People can learn vicariously by watching how you interact with other people and behave in general. Joynicole shares a story about how one particular person has modeled leadership behaviors throughout her life. Here's Joynicole.
My father he was a bright light for me. And it seems a bit cliche, right? To say, oh, my parents, my father. But when I think of the people who showed the way, who lived the way, who modeled it, who exemplified what is purposeful and good, there's just no brighter light than my dad. When I was starting high school, my father was retiring from Eastman Kodak Company. He had worked at Eastman Kodak for 21 years, started when he was 17, back at Hampton Institute, when it was still called that. And it was time to retire. And he really had to make a choice about, okay, I'm not even 40. I'm just in my 30s. What do I do next? And my father decided to go to medical school.
Wow.
Yeah. So what really impressed me was to see my father, who was successful. He was a successful chemist, ran a major lab, and for all intents and purposes could have sat back and rested on his proverbial laurels. He decided to embed himself in something. Now in 2021, is it unreasonable to be in your late 30s and decide to go to medical school? Maybe not. We have such untraditional means of education now. But at the time, it was rare to see someone his age sitting in a classroom. And he did it. And he didn't just do it, he excelled at it. What really moved me was his, he had to go back to community college to take classes because he had been out of school so long. And he's in rooms with these young people. and he's feeling probably a little bit, his age. I'm not the youngest child he has. And so he's got children at home that could be in his class.
Yes.
But he did it. And it laid this map for me that says, you know what? Who cares? Like if it's something that moves you, if it's something that brings you peace and joy or something that you're passionate about, you should do it. That he exemplified for me until he left the earth in 2019. He always did what moved him. And people don't quite understand this unless I explain it. It wasn't like a luxury, like, oh, I'll just do what makes me feel good. It's his map for me was do what brings you joy and creates legacy. Give something, like leave something, produced something that can produce something that can produce something. And that changed the way I parent now. It changed the way I love as far as my friends and my family. I can't think of an example of a person who taught me that life is really not about us. It's about them. It's about those who are watching, who you're feeding emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It's about them, right? We're just here for them. And he did that. And he laid that groundwork. And he was untraditional in every single way, though he was quite conservative and traditional. Watching him model just that sort of passion, I honestly cannot think of a person that shone a brighter light for me than my dad.
Paraphrasing part of what you just said, and something that just struck me that I wrote down with your father, if you're passionate about something, you should pursue it.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they don't know what they're passionate about.
Yeah, it took me a minute. I think I was living up to everyone else's expectation of me long before I knew what really moved me.
Ah,
But those things you go to bed and you're still thinking about them?
yeah.
Or the things that when you're in a conversation, your voice rises about them, or you feel like you can't be quiet about them, or they just so make you angry, or they so make you passionate and you feel so moved, those things that irritate you, that you can't stop considering. That's where we find our passion. It's not the things that make us the most money, sometimes, and we hope so. They may not be. It's the things that make us the most emotional. The things that we go, oh, I get up on my soapbox and I can't get down. Those things. I have a saying on my wall. It basically says, if you can't shut up about it, do something about it.
Ah,
And I think that's where we find our passion. The things we can't shut up about. We find ourselves thinking about them and talking about them and reading about them. Well, if they're bothering you that much, if you're spending that much energy on it, spend real energy and do something to affect change with it.
if you're afraid and you fear that, don't let that stop you, right?
Don't let it stop you. Use that fear. Take that energy and use it to propel yourself.
The other thing that goes with that, when you do that, you may not have a clue to how to go about doing it, but you'll find people all around you that will help you along the way. You cannot do it by yourself.
No. No man is an island unto himself. I don't know why we think we can live alone or as a loner. Humanity, we feed off one another. It's just a part of our makeup. We get our juice, so to speak, one from another.
Mm.
And I think it's so good when you finally find that thing that you go, you know what? I'm tired of talking about it. I'm tired of thinking about it. I'm tired of beating myself up or even just reading every article about it. It's the thing I find first when I go to read the news. I'm going to jump in. The same kind of energy that makes us passionate, if that's the word, about things is the same energy that makes our neighbors passionate, right? Makes our friends. It's the same thing. Like we're not so different at all. And so when you finally stand up and say, this irks me, or this moves me, or this gives me joy, or this gives me peace, or this gives me laughter, because we are all the same primarily, there's people around that will say, you know what, me too.
That's right.
Me too. And when one jumps in, another jumps in. And then we find ourselves on the ocean, rowing a boat together and rising. And it's just super cool.
Part 3, maximize the voice of others. Connect with others. This is one of the 7 leadership principles that I frequently talk about. It's one of the most popular ones. There's several ways in which we could connect with other people. One way is by hearing their voice and acknowledging what they have to offer. Joynicole advises us on how we can do a better job of connecting with others. Again, here's Joynicole.
Oddly enough, my advice is probably unpopular. I think we must listen. We've done enough talking as we rise and as we are promoted, and we talk, we hear ourselves, we have great ideas, and they're all valuable. But I think to become better, we have to practice the art of listening. And I mean deep, active listening. The art of pausing to truly hear what others are saying to us, beyond the words, to hear their bodies, to hear their pauses, to hear their pain and their pleasure, to stop and to take a moment and to listen. Not necessarily to share what we think is right or good, or to put our theories and our theatrics on stage, but just to stop and be quiet and listen. I think if there's an advice I could give to leaders today, it would be practice the art of hearing what others are saying, the messaging they're trying to deliver to you. Because if we can hear, if we can really stop and hear the message, we can apply all the wonderful principles and theories and practices. And we can develop something that's real, that's humble, and that's responsive.
Adding to that, if I was going to add something to it, is if you're in a position where you can help other people and you really focus on listening, there's I don't know if the word's responsibility or a need to not just hear what the other person is saying, but to inquire and make sure that you understand what the other person is saying rather than focusing on what you can add and contribute and
That's right.
and share. Make sure you understand what's happening. When I had Anne-Marie on, Anne-Marie Schroeder, I thought I understood her message in the first part of her episode, and I didn't get it. But I asked her some questions, made a comment about something she said, and then she clarified and expanded. And by the end, it was like, man, that's a totally different message than I thought. So inquiry is such a big part of listening.
Yes. You know, we talk about listening as just being quiet, but listening says, I heard the words, this is what I believe I heard. Is that what you meant to say? And then giving room for that person to say yes or no. And then if they say no, being humble enough to say, I am so sorry. I apologize. I didn't hear well. And listening again. And it's cyclical and it's life-giving because it's alive. It's something we do constantly. If we're really trying to lead well, we do it cyclically with every person in our sphere of influence. Doesn't mean you spend 6 hours. You stop long enough. You stop thinking about your biases. You stop thinking about your solutions. You stop thinking about your next sentence or what you want to say next. You stop and you just receive the message. And then you give space to yourself and to the other person to say, this is what I believe I heard. Was that your intention? And then being mature and responsible enough to say, I'm sorry when we get it wrong.
If we apply that to people we know and people that in general we resonate with, I think that's okay. But if someone listens to what you're advising, if they apply that to people who they do not respect, they do not like because of opposing beliefs, attitudes, views of gender, race, ethnicity, whatever, and you do that with someone you would consider a person that you would never talk to ever,
Mhm.
I think that's when you really need to do this.
The more we disagree, the more we need to listen. That's It's a hard thing to minimize myself to maximize your voice. That's a hard thing. And it becomes even increasingly difficult when your voice is not really what I want to hear. And I've already decided I don't agree. Maximizing your voice in my head and my heart when I already have made this decision, you're wrong. That's hard. But if we are good, and when I mean good, I mean if we are training ourselves to become increasingly adept and adaptable as leaders, as humans, then that's what we do. We go to the one that we least want to hear. There's a wonderful speech by Colin Powell,
Mm.
who I consider a person incredibly influential and a truly beautiful. And I say that because he was brilliant and he modeled his morals. In one of his speeches, he talks about the fact that we are to show ourselves as we are. And so he talks about leading a people who are hungry and tired and exhausted when you're hungry and tired and exhausted, and not being ashamed of acknowledging that and being vulnerable enough to voice it so that they see you as human and they trust you enough to follow you. The truth is, change is created when people trust you. If you just go in yelling and screaming and hollering about your rightness, well, that doesn't really help. But when you listen, when you hear, when you acknowledge, especially in the face of adversity or disagreement, that models something most people are astonished by. And they begin to trust you. Even if they disagree, they trust you because you heard them and you made them feel seen. And that you cannot purchase or buy with all of the money in the world.
What you just described reminded me of someone named Daryl Davis. Are you familiar with him?
I don't think so.
In my last book, I actually write a postscript about him, and I'll put a link in the show notes. He went and listened to not just people in the KKK, but he listened to and met with grandmasters and so forth. He became best of friends with one of them. Now, this is a person who's Black, who's a jazz musician, no training in psychology or anything like that. He got to know, and it was someone named Robert White, got to know him. And at some point, there was two people in particular. I may have Robert White might not have been the person that did this, might have been another person. He was a police officer at one time. This Grandmaster gave to Daryl Davis two things: his police uniform and his KKK robes. He gave up and left the KKK completely because of his relationship. What you talked about, Daryl would say, is that because he listened, it's almost like a parallel to what you were saying, that this other person began to trust Daryl at some point, was open to listening to what Daryl had to say. Of course, it wasn't overnight.
Sure.
What you've just described, it's easy to do with people you care about and people that you're in sync with who have similar beliefs. Real leadership comes in is trying that with people who are diametrically opposed to you and finding out from them what you have in common with them.
And the truth is, there is always something in common. I was in Russia this month for a few weeks, and Dubai, and it's amazing. Every time I travel, I learn more about myself. And it's odd because I'm called in as the expert. And I usually find I'm so not the expert. I learn more about who I am. I find myself peeling layers of myself off and trying to replace them with something better. What I found in the midst of a global pandemic and this distrust and mistrust of governmental agencies and this generational gap because we have these moves of technology that's distributing information at the speed of light, whether good or bad, negative or positive, true or not. What I found is that at the end of it all, we're all the same. We're just the same. We're just trying to navigate really choppy waters. We're just trying to keep ourselves afloat in whitewater. And you're right, we can't do it alone. It takes more than one person. We need someone. You need the person who's saying left and right and watch out. And you need the person who can balance you. And you need all of these functions to work together. And we're all doing it. It doesn't have any regard to race or ethnicity or gender or country. It's just humanity trying to find the best way to stay afloat and to make it to whatever our next step or our next position or our next call or our next role is healthier or minimally not damaged, right, from the last place in our journey. And that binds us and it makes us the same. Language doesn't mean we're different. Skin color doesn't mean we're different. Who we vote for on a ballot doesn't mean we're different. We're not so different. The truth is, we're just trying to get to the next best thing for us.
My thanks to Joynicole Martinez. If you'd like to learn more about Joynicole, go to the show notes. If you have a comment or question, go to unlabelleadership.com, click the message icon, and leave a voicemail message for up to 1 minute. I'd like to thank those who contribute to the show. Your contributions make a difference because this is an all-volunteer service. Lastly, I'd like to thank you for listening. This is Gary DePaul. Until next time, lead on.